trying to sort it out. But we are going to look ahead, as we must, at a very, very important issue that has become the priority for the center that I've taken on arriving here, which is to deal with the whole issue of this country's ailing, crumbling, one might say, infrastructure. One of the things that we're hoping to do at the center in particular, giving our longstanding, now 30-year role primarily being involved in the national security debate and homeland security debate, particularly under my predecessor, now Ambassador Tim Romer. Tim was our ambassador to India, is to highlight the national security dimensions of this problem. And not just that it's fundamentally, as it is, an economic issue. There's huge sustainability, environmental issues with this. But there also is, as Dwight D. Eisenhower highlighted during his tenure as president in taking on the interstate highway system, there is a lot about our infrastructure that is important to our national security, and now in this new context, our homeland security. So I could not be more excited that we have with us today here Governor Ed Rendell, who's brought so much leadership to this issue, and is, of course, currently governor of Pennsylvania, formerly mayor of Philadelphia, one of those great northeastern cities that early on invested in infrastructure, and then about 3 decades ago stopped investing enough in infrastructure, as much of the country seems to have done. My one-liner on this is we're like a nation who's inherited our grandparents' mansion, and we decided we're not going to do any upkeep. People are driving by liking the house, and we're saying, yeah, it is pretty on the outside, but the wiring's gone, the plumbing's gone, and we need to get on with it. Governor Rendell has also, of course, played a very important role in an initiative with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger from California and Michael Bloomberg, a truly, I guess what we call it, a multi-partisan, independent, Democrat, Republican effort to raise the profile of this issue, rally elected leaders to the cause, and just yesterday was in town on this issue with a part of his initiative of Rebuilding America. And we're delighted, again, that he's bringing this leadership to this town on that issue and was kind enough to stay with us today. I do want to highlight one other thing that, Governor, you've done here that's so important of late, and that is with this tragedy we just had in Haiti. I don't know if some of you caught in the headlines, but the governor did something, I think, enormously important, certainly for 53 young children, orphans who were in Haiti, flew down and brought them back, and they're now in a hospital in Pittsburgh, and I think virtually all of them have adopted parents lined up. One of the things that this country, I think, does well is respond to crisis well. We wish we did some stuff up front better, but it takes extraordinary acts of leadership sometimes to focus our attention and to let us know that things can be done, must be done, for folks who are facing those kinds of circumstances. And Governor Rendell, thank you for your leadership on that issue, as well as this other longstanding one we have here today. So let me begin maybe by asking you just how you got into taking on the infrastructure issue as such a major a point of passion of yours, and of all the other challenges that obviously are following the governor's plate, why take this one on?
Well, first of all, let me say thanks to all the people at the center for the work you do. It's unbelievably important how we need groups like this that have the ability to do long-term vision, long-term planning. Sometimes, all the time, government's biggest weakness is we react. We're very often not proactive. We're meeting immediate challenges that crop up. We can't plan for the long term, and no business would be run like that. And when we try to run government that way, it often brings about disasters, and this is a perfect example of the state of the nation's infrastructure. But great organizations like yours supplement what the government does, have that sort of long-term vision and planning. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. And I know Steve's work from his prior job. I have a very good friend who works up in New York with Foreign Policy Council, and Steve's a great leader for all of you to have, and I think you'll be excited with his leadership over the future. Like all things in our lives, there's a significant turning point usually comes from an incident that you weren't expecting to happen. I was mayor of Philadelphia, and in one of my early years as mayor, we had about 45 straight days, maybe 50, of below freezing weather. It's hard to believe, although this winter's been cold, but nothing like that. Literally 50 straight days where the temperature never cracked 32 degrees. And everything was frozen. The river, the Schuylkill River was frozen, everything was frozen. And then on the 51st day, it was 65 degrees. And on the 52nd degree, it was 68 degrees. 52nd day, it was 68 degrees. What happened then is not surprising. We had 58 water mains in different parts of the city all broke. And there were floods, and it was absolute flat-out chaos. And of course, we reacted to the immediate problem, but I called my water commissioner in and my streets commissioner in, and I said, how did this happen? And of course, they talked about the unusual events, the unusual series of events in terms of the temperature being so cold for so long and rising so quickly. But they said, you have to understand, Mayor, that the pipes that cracked in most of the water mains in Philadelphia were laid in the 19th century. And they're laid about less than a foot below the ground. There's none of the modern technology that protects us from these type of events by burying the mains more deeply and by having certain coatings. We don't have any of those. We have a water system that was created in the 19th century. Now, I was mayor, I think this was occurring in 1994. And so many of these water mains were 100 years old. There had been no improvements, no changes, no upgrades, etc. So I said, my God, is this prevalent in other cities? He said almost every northeast and midwestern city has the same problem. Interestingly, fast forward today as governor, our biggest problem in Pennsylvania with water and sewer is leaky pipes, particularly in smaller rural and ex-urban areas. We lose 60% of our water because of leaky pipes in some of those water systems. So it's a systemic problem all across, and I think Steve's analogy about the house that's made no attempt to upgrade wiring, plumbing, etc., is very true about what we do. So I got involved in infrastructure as mayor, and in 1998 I became the head of a nationwide organization at the time called Rebuild America. I don't know how many of you remember. The nation's premier infrastructure organization at that time. I became its chair. Rebuild America, after my 2 years as chair, actually wound up going out of business. The reason was that Rebuild was particularly a organization whose membership was all exclusively made up of people who had a pecuniary interest in reinvestment in the nation's infrastructure. They were architects, engineers, road builders, constructors, even investment bankers, because most of infrastructure work is done in this country through bonding, except the federal government, which is the only entity in the country that doesn't have a capital budget. But so all of these organizations had a vested interest, and eventually the weight of that clear pecuniary interest brought us down. Fast forward, I become governor, and all of a sudden I'm handed as governor-elect all of these different materials, transition materials. And someone came to me and said, you'll like this, Pennsylvania ranks #1 in the country. And I said, oh, that's good, what is it? Number of structurally deficient and functionally obsolete bridges. #1 in the country. Over 6,000. Actually, it was about 5,800 at the time. So I immediately became, when I became governor, tripled our budget, state dollars spent on repairing bridges, from about $200 million to $700 million in less than 4 years. At the end of those 4 years, instead of having 5,800 structurally deficient bridges, we had 6,100. We had fallen further behind because every time we fixed 2, 3 more were added to the list, because we also led the nation in bridges 75 years of age or older. And the recommended lifespan for a bridge is 40 years. And we had more 75-plus-year-old bridges than any state in the Union. So it became clear to me that no matter what effort state and local government made to repair our infrastructure, and there are a myriad of infrastructure problems, no matter what effort we made, it wasn't going to be enough. We were always sledding uphill. It wasn't going to be enough. So we decided to try to resurrect an organization like